Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Reshma Patel. I'm president of the MIT South Asian Alumni Association. We strive to build community, to educate, and to strengthen ties between MIT and South Asia. We are thankful to Gurumurthy Kalyaraman, past president of MITSAAA, for organizing today's discussion. I will turn it over to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Reshma. Thank you very much. And good afternoon if you're on East Coast, United States, and good morning if you're in other parts of United States, west of us, and good evening, good night if you're in India and other various parts of the world. Thank you for joining us. We are delighted to have you here on behalf of MIT South Asian Alumni Association, as you heard from Reshma. Also, the MIT Sloan Club of New York is partnering with us today. We are delighted to welcome you on behalf of both the alumni groups. We have with us today two remarkable men with great insights on geopolitics in general. We have with us Ambassador Ken Jester, who has served as India's ambassador relatively recently, in 2017 to 2021. He's actually currently in India visiting. He's speaking to us, coming to us from New Delhi. And Ambassador Jester has been part of the National Security Council, National Economic Council. He has been in private sector. I'm a great admirer of Jim Baker, the Secretary of State. Some of you may know him, a lot of you may know him, and his deputy, Larry Eagleburger, and Ken worked with Larry Eagleburger. And we also have with us Ambassador Frank Wisner, who has been ambassador in a variety of countries, including India, Zambia, Philippines, Egypt. I think I got them right. He has had a long career in foreign service, United States Foreign Service after graduating from Princeton. He has worked in defense policy. He has worked in international security affairs. He has been on the field in various diplomatic assignments and missions and embassies. And he was ambassador to India in the mid-1990s, straddling the Rao, Deve Gowda, Gujarat, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, that era of the mid-1990s. And of course, when Ken was the ambassador, Prime Minister Narendra Modi was leading the country, as he still continues to. We're delighted to have these two gentlemen with us. So here is our plan for the day. First, Ambassador Jester will make some opening remarks and observations, and then Ambassador Wisner, and then we will take questions. Please place your questions in the question and answer, the window, the box, the dialogue, and we will work on them after these initial observations and remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Ken. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, GK, and it's a true pleasure to be on the same podium with Frank Wisner, who I regard as one of my mentors. And he said I worked at the State Department with Jim Baker and Larry Eagleburger, but also with Frank Wisner, who is the Undersecretary for Security Affairs, and has been a good friend and, as I said, mentor ever since. And the fact that he was one of my predecessors simply made the position even more distinguished when I got into it. So again, thank you for being here, Frank. GK asked me to make some overall comments about the state of geopolitics in the world today. You know, our attention over the last 7+ weeks has been focused on the fallout from the unexpected and tragic events in Israel on October 7th, including now the drama related to the process of releasing hostages. But those events, in my opinion, are indicative of a broader period of flux and fragmentation in international affairs that I think will reset the world order with new distributions of power, new alignments among countries, and reforms to global institutions. This degree of change is similar to the periods at the end of World War II and the end of the Cold War. We're really seeing the tectonic plates of world stability throughout all regions of the world shifting. For example, in Europe, you see Russia's invasion of Ukraine. You have a member of the UN Security Council violating the basic principles upon which the UN was formed. And this has led to an expansion of NATO and greater unity than we've had in many years. In the Middle East, a series of events over the last several years, going back to 2020 with the Abraham Accords, and Israel normalized relations with the UAE and with Bahrain. You had a new grouping, the I2U2, with Israel, India, United States, and the UAE to work together on economic and technology issues. You had China's entry into the region and brokering the restoration of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The U.S. was seeking to work to normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And now we have the tragic events that began with Hamas's terrorist activities of October 7th and the response by the Israelis. That could unravel all the changes we've seen in the last several years, or perhaps hopefully it could begin a process where we could try to construct a more lasting and enduring peace in the region. And of course, in the Indo-Pacific, you're dealing with the rise of China, the rise of India, the reinvigoration of the Quad, which is a grouping among Japan, Australia, the United States, and India, Korea-Japan reconciliation, along with a major shift in Japan's defense posture, and related to this region, an expansion of the BRICS to include 6 new countries, and really the voice of the global South, which countries are unhappy with the current distribution of power as reflected in global institutions. Now, along with these geopolitical shifts, we have really seen a breakdown of some of these global institutions. The UN Security Council is dysfunctional now because of the disagreements among the United States, Russia, and China. The World Trade Organization, which is a consensus organization, has become largely ineffectual, and we see the rise of regional trade groupings. And even the effectiveness of the World Bank and the IMF is questioned by some, as they are not as user-friendly as some countries might like, and we see greater regional financial structures, especially around constructing quality infrastructure. Now, how all these changes will play out over the next several years will determine the new world order, and it's not a foregone conclusion how developments will go, and it's going to have a profound impact on companies that do business internationally. And while many of these shifting relationships are interrelated, the most systemic ones, in my view, are those occurring in the Indo-Pacific with the rise of China, the rise of India, and how the United States and other countries will respond to it. Very briefly, the United States and China had a cooperative, it's sometimes competitive relationship for approximately 35 years since they normalized relations at the end of 1978. But in the last 10 years or so, the relationship, for a variety of reasons, has become more confrontational. As I'm sure the audience knows, President Biden and President Xi met on the margins of the APEC Summit in San Francisco in November to try to use President Biden's words to put a floor on the relationship and to make sure it didn't spiral out of control, especially unintentionally. It was a cordial meeting, and it led to a few significant initiatives. Most important, that there'd be a partial resumption. I don't think it's going to be the same as it completely was before the U.S. shot down the Chinese balloon that was floating over the United States, but a resumption of military-to-military talks, which is critical. Many countries, even when they're not in good relations, have back-channel military talks, including India and Pakistan. But they had been completely dropped between the United States and China, and that can only lead to bad things, especially when there were close calls on the sea of Chinese ships intercepting U.S. ships or in the air. In addition, the countries agreed to try to curb production of the opioid fentanyl, to work together on climate change, and to discuss risk associated with artificial intelligence. But the meeting did not, in my view, resolve the fundamental tensions between the parties. President Xi did not yield any ground on his intention to unify Taiwan with mainland China, and President Biden did not alter the U.S. policy of limiting certain exports of key technologies to China, or his executive order that is aimed at monitoring and limiting outbound investment in areas that can directly contribute to China's military capabilities, initially focused on semiconductors, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence. The summit also did not appear to bridge the differences between the two countries with regard to the two major conflicts going on right now, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the Israel-Hamas war. In addition, I would say that with President Biden heading into the 2024 election, it's probably going to lead to a toughening of some of the statements relative to China because of the domestic political pressures to do so. So this is going to be a relationship with significant problems that will have to be managed, but I don't think will be resolved. I also don't think there'll be a decoupling between the countries. The economies are too much intertwined, and an effort to decouple them would have, I think, very negative impacts for the world economy. But there will be in critical areas what they call de-risking or building higher fences around a small lawn of issues. Now, at the same time, relations between Beijing and New Delhi have also deteriorated in the last few years, due primarily to the issues that occurred in 2020 when China came across the line of actual control, and there were the first fatalities in June of that year in 45 years between the Chinese and the Indians. And while the two sides have largely disengaged now, they have not de-escalated. They're building permanent infrastructure. There are substantial numbers of troops stationed on either side of the line of actual control and heavy artillery. Beijing has sought to compartmentalize these problems and otherwise resume normal relations, but India has said that they will not resume normal relations until the status quo ante is restored. In the words of Foreign Minister, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, from India's perspective, the state of the border will determine the state of the relationship. Now, the fact that the United States and more recently as well, Australia and Japan have resumed dialogues at the leadership level with China, I don't think is going to fundamentally change India's position to date and their need to restore the status quo ante. And at the same time, to finish the third side of this triangle, the U.S.-India relationship continues to broaden, to deepen, and to flourish, as exemplified by the June 2023 state visit of Prime Minister Modi, and more recently, the 2+2 meeting in New Delhi in November, which is the foreign and defense ministers of each side getting together. These events further enhance the already close relationship, especially in defense cooperation and working together on critical and emerging technologies, again, such as semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing, and then the desire to create resilient supply chains, and so much more. Access to high technology has always been a critical source for economic development and a key element in the relationship between India and the United States, and that's going to continue to be the case, and it's why so much attention is being given to this new initiative, ISET, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, which is importantly being led by the national security advisors of each country. So I expect New Delhi will continue to seize the opportunities that are being presented to it, not just by the United States, but by other Western countries, to accelerate its rise economically, gain technologically, and really rise in the global power structure. Also to try to reduce the strategic gap with China and to enhance, if possible, its military deterrence against China. And while the United States, on the one hand, is tightening export controls on China, and more recently, as I mentioned, had issued an executive order restricting outbound investments to China, the situation is moving in just the opposite direction with India. We're trying to loosen export controls, make more technology available, and setting up mechanisms to encourage private sector investment in India in sectors that have a defense, a high technology, or a manufacturing component. Let me just sort of say, as this group knows, India has been only partially successful in becoming an alternative supply chain hub to China. At the same time, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, and other countries have been able to get some of the investment that was not going into China. And India will have to continue to take the steps, the encouraging steps it has been to reform its economy to attract more foreign investment. One major challenge in this regard is that India is currently outside the regional trade structure for the Indo-Pacific. It withdrew from the Regional and Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement in 2019 after 7 years of negotiation, in part because they didn't want to be subordinated to China. And it's not a member of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. And by the way, the United States, in my opinion, strategically made a mistake in withdrawing from that agreement also. So finally, we need to remember that India is not an ally of the United States. Sometimes people think that's the case. It's a strategic partner. It doesn't want to subordinate its foreign policy to any other country. It wants to maintain independence. We have seen that in its reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And India has a vision for a multipolar world, which gives it a significant role and ability to maneuver between countries, which is somewhat different than the US Western-led international order. So how these issues play out over the years and whether some of these philosophical differences will put limitations on the degree of cooperation remains to be seen. But the relationship is really extremely positive these days and very strong. There was a recent indictment that maybe we'll get to in some of the questions and answers, and I can give you my view on that. And then finally, and I think Frank will speak more about this in his comments, we had today the passing of Henry Kissinger, who, while he had a difficult time with India when he was National Security Advisor, really has become very revered in the country. He visited when I was ambassador. He was asked, as he has been on previous occasions, to brief the Indian Foreign Service, and is held in very high regard. I know that External Affairs Minister Jay Shankar would meet with him when he would come to the United States, and so he'll be greatly missed, both for his own role internationally and in constructing a stable world order, but also for the impact he had on the U.S.-India relationship. So let me stop there.
Thank you, Ken. And to those of you who are participating, if you have a question, type it in the question and answer dialogue, and we will get to them. Some of you have sent me questions, I have them, but please do type and we'll get to them. Now we'll get a chance and opportunity to listen to Ambassador Wiesner.
GK, thank you very much, Reshma. It's a pleasure, indeed an honor, to be with all of you in the MIT Association. And I'm also really pleased to be able to share this day's events with Ken Juster, whose friendship I've enjoyed for a number of years and whom I hold in the very highest professional regard and admire his innings in India, which were consequential in the shaping of the modern U.S.-India relationship. But Ken ended, and I'll begin my remarks with just a brief comment on Henry Kissinger. I say that because you're going to see very considerable coverage of Henry Kissinger's life and foreign policy priorities, and you will see some attention given to the period he served with President Nixon, the Bay of Bengal, the enterprise, the independence of Bangladesh, and the positions we took at that time, which Henry Kissinger's authored. But Ken has made the essential point. If you stop there, you don't understand Henry Kissinger's views about India and the importance of the U.S.-India relationship. Henry Kissinger regarded India as a great civilizational force He enjoyed the personal company of many, many Indians, including Jai Shankar. He met with and met with many other leading figures in India, traveled in the country, addressed audiences, and really became someone that Indians developed a new picture of that was long distant from the old enterprise story. And so when all of you think about Henry Kissinger in India, remember the core point, and that is he believed that India was a great power on the rise. He welcomed that rise, and he felt that India would be able to make a significant contribution towards the establishment of a balance of power on the world stage in general. But let me turn to the balance of my remarks by saying that Ken's in India today. I was in India literally a couple of weeks ago, just back, and I returned with some impressions that I'd like to share with you. The first impression is I have never known India to be so buoyant, so absolutely certain that India's time has come, whether it was businessmen or people in the press or ordinary citizens. I found wherever I traveled in my recent visit, Indians speaking with such confidence about the successes of their country, not just the moonshot, but the successes economically, the successes culturally, the fact that India is today a major player on the world stage, the G20 having been a recent example of India standing on a global basis. That buoyancy is shared. Not only is it by the BJP and the government in office, but I'd say the opposition as well, and by all classes of businessmen, as I mentioned, the press, others, that sense of confidence in India that while I've seen India in various moods over my life, never have I seen her quite as self-confident as I found her today. And for good reason. The Indian economy has been performing strongly. It's running at about 6.5%, 7% GDP rate of growth. It's come back from COVID, which it survived quite effectively. The government's own policies of spreading with information technology, the government services nationwide, heavy investments in infrastructure, in education, in medical facilities. It's a pleasure to return to India and see how much of a buzz there is literally on the ground, and part of India's present and indeed India's future. I am convinced that the growth path that India is on at the moment, while there are notable pieces missing in it, notably job creation continues to lag, and it will always be a difficult issue. Skilling, education, even healthcare are all issues that India is going to have to address in the future and continue to make progress on. But the buoyancy in the economy is real, and it's likely to continue. On the political front, India's in the midst of perennial state elections. Some are right underway as we speak. I'm not going to predict the outcome of elections. I do a bad job predicting outcomes of elections in this country, but I can say for sure that when the election for the Lok Sabha begins, that I predict, and I think quite safely, that the Prime Minister and his party will return, maybe with a somewhat reduced majority, but whether it's in coalition or not, a continuation in office. I underscore that because this will be the third mandate of Narendra Modi, and the very stability of governance, the very stability of India's message to itself in the world comes out in the fact that you've got 3 innings with the prime minister in office. And that gives a certain steadiness of signal and confidence in the way the world looks at India and takes India's word into account. Does that mean there are no problems? Of course, there are problems just like there are economic issues. On the political front, you will very quickly chance on those who complain about the heavy use of the enforcement agencies of government, fears for the future of the press, full-throated respect for the judiciary, and minority treatment. Muslims in particular have felt disobliged in the Modi years. But overall, I'll come back to the same key point. India is on the move. Indians feel good about themselves, and that provides a very solid platform for the kind of relationship that Ken Juster ably described, the Indian-American relationship. I have followed this subject with particular interest, involvement over nearly 30 years. And I can assure you today, I have never seen the relationship in better shape than I see it is in today. It's the meeting of the Prime Minister and Joe Biden in Washington. It is Joe Biden's trip to Delhi during the G20 and interactions of increasing intensity, cabinet to cabinet. The line of agreements that are now being reached between the United States and India is as long as your arm, and as Ken correctly pointed out, covering a wide variety of fields: economic, technological, financial, energy, and of course, security. But at the heart of the relationship lies a political understanding between the United States and India about our respective interests and the People's Republic of China. It is the emergence of Chinese power that has given particular salience to the US-India relationship. India's concerns about its own relationship with China and ours, which Ken also articulated quite carefully and thoroughly. But our respective concerns have brought us together informally in political exchanges, in intelligence exchanges, in military to military cooperation, and informal institutions like the Quad, which has a broader base, including Japan and Australia as other key participants. So there is a healthy and robust tie. Our cabinet officers move back and forth. And if I look around at the challenges in front of us, it will be heavily involved in simply implementing what the two governments have agreed to. Bureaucracies in this country, bureaucracies in India are complex institutions. And when you start bringing about big changes, changing regulations, changing points of view, changing policy, it takes a while to settle in. And there can be bumps along the way. But the trajectory is clear. The US-India relationship is strong. It's going to get stronger. And in my judgment, the best years in the relationship are still ahead of us. As long as, and Ken was right in underscoring, that we show respect for India's own particular way of seeing the world, her desire to maintain strategic autonomy, the desire to be a partner, not an ally, the desire for India to find her own balance with other nations in Asia and in the world. As long as we respect that sense of India's position in the world and her regard for that position, then I'm confident about the future course of our relations. GK and Reshma, I'm going to stop there. Turn back to all of you for further questions or comments from the floor and yourselves.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Wisner, and thank you, Ken Jester. So we have several questions I see in the Q&A dialogue. I will read them out, and but one of them that has been raised with me and others that's very recent in everyone's mind is this. You know, of course, you heard that the Canadian government expressed some serious misgivings about the death of a Sikh extremist, terrorist, Sikh Canadian citizen in Canada. And that's public, and India has expressed its denial, stout denial, and there has been some back and forth on that. You know that. And I think both countries are trying to find a way to address that. But compounding that to somewhat surprising, at least in the public domain, as you mentioned, Ken, we had a true bill indictment yesterday here in New York, Southern District of United States, of an Indian person who is alleged, of course, that he was hired to assassinate, kill another Sikh person who is a leader here, at least to some, and who has been very critical of India. This gentleman is both Canadian and American citizen. And the indictment was revealed yesterday, and the Indian government has been careful and says they are taking all the inputs and reviewing them. And that indictment seems to also indicate that the Canadian allegations, we have some evidentiary basis. You know, this is an important one that's recent. What is the optics on it? What do you see? And well, India and United States and India and Canada, all the three together, be able to find an appropriate mechanism to resolve this important one, each of them recognizing their sovereignty and respect for each other and admiration for each other. Ken, you want to?
Okay, well, you know, it's a 15-page indictment that I did read today, and it does, while there are allegations, there's a great deal of specificity about the fact that a unnamed law enforcement or intelligence officer was sort of orchestrating these efforts through a go-between in the United States, who would then hire someone, and this assassination plot was stopped. But it also, as you said, relates what was going on in the United States to what was going on in Canada. Now, there's no indication in the indictment that this was known by senior officials in the Indian government. We'll have to wait to see what happens. The United States has requested that India investigates this, and the Indians said that they wouldn't take it very seriously. And we'll just have to see. I mean, you know, big countries, there are a lot of people and things happen, and the question is whether this was a rogue operation by this individual or whether it was part of a broader policy, which the Indians have denied. But it does lend further credibility to the initial allegation made by Prime Minister Trudeau, and it's a serious issue. But at this point, I don't see it as one that's going to derail the strategic relationship. And it's one that, as I said, doesn't point to senior Indian officials. If that were to change, then it becomes even more serious. But hopefully this will lead the government of India to look into this and to make sure that this type of activity does not continue overall. But it's a bump in the road, but it's one that both sides, or all three sides, with the Canada, the United States, are seeking to manage and to put in a broader context of the strategic relationship.
Thank you, Ken. Frank, any thoughts, any reflections to add to
Yeah,
Ken's?
GK, a couple of thoughts. First
Sure.
of all, let me associate myself with absolutely everything that Ken just said. And so what I have to say is does not address the issues because, like Ken, I am neither privy to the intelligence that lay behind Prime Minister Trudeau's statements to the Canadian Parliament, nor do I have the details of the indictment here in New York. But having said that, I think I also want to associate myself and all of you on the call today with the thought that Ken laid out very clearly, and that is the relationship between the United States and India, and I'd suggest Canada and India today, is so much deeper and broader that it is in our respective interests to manage issues like this, even when they're issues of seriousness and sensitivity, to manage to deal with. When I was in India in the 90s, we didn't have the same ballast in the relationship. And so an event would come along and the ship would really rock back and forth. That's not the case today. Today, we have to take questions like these and deal with them appropriately in intelligence channels where that's the appropriate way, or in law enforcement and judicial channels and where that's appropriate, and to do it discreetly and carefully and privately without scoring points against one another. Now, this is sometimes easier said than done, particularly when the season is electoral and our political leadership can pick up the mood of the times and try to make something of it. But to me, depoliticizing issues like this is the right way forward. And I think the relationship is sound enough that we can manage it politically.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Ken. So there are a lot of questions. I'm going to combine a few of them and phrase it this way. There are lots of conflicts in the world. You know, Russia, Ukraine, we have the Hamas, Middle East, and other parts of the world. And a two-part question. One is on a more practical domain. How do you think it's going to impact, or it is impacting, the global economy? Particularly for countries like India, how does it shape up? That's one. What do you see the road? The second is, it seems like there's a lot of strife in the world now. So there's all these alliances, all these institutions that we are building for a better world order. Is that a pipe dream, or is it a reality that we can work towards, and what may be the mechanism? One is jobs economy, other is geopolitical stability and peace and prosperity. Ken, you want to go?
Okay, well, there's no doubt that conflicts in the world are going to have an impact on the economy. And we've seen that with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's led to higher food prices, to higher energy prices, to higher fertilizer prices. And one of the reasons why I think a lot of countries have not supported sanctions against Russia is because they've been adversely affected by this conflict. Whether one could have anticipated some of these collateral issues in advance and tried to mitigate them, and there's certainly efforts now, but that's why you see folks wanting to try to resolve some of the issues. And the Israel issue, again, if this spreads into a broader conflict, and there's efforts being made to try to prevent that from happening with Hezbollah and with Iran, that also will have significant economic consequences. And even for Israel, I've read reports that if the fighting goes beyond the summer of this year or this coming year, that will have a very detrimental impact on its economy. So the system, can only take so much stress. And as I said, even the China-U.S. Confrontation would have tremendously damaging impacts on the economy. Even efforts to decouple or to have sanctions has taken a couple of points perhaps off of global GDP. And if there was actually a conflict, it would be catastrophic. So that's partly what leaders are trying to manage, but they have to do it in the context of the reality of what's going on. And that's one of the great challenges. Now, geopolitically, again, as I tried to say at the outset, we've really seen a bit of a unraveling of the effectiveness of global institutions to govern the challenges we have, and shifting alignments of power and relationships, in part due to the rise of China, the rise of the actions of Russia, the formation of a Russia, China, Iran, maybe North Korea axis of countries that are really seeking to, certainly Russia is seeking to completely disrupt the current international order. It's not clear whether China supports that completely or wants to reform it. India is a country that would like to reform the order, but we are certainly going through a lot of change now, and everyone is going to have to affect what happens. And none of the issues that I raised at the outset have a clear outcome. We don't know whether Russia is going to win out in Ukraine, or whether they will suffer a defeat. Some of that will have a fallout, it already has, on India's ability to get weaponry from Russia and its need to diversify. And so all of these issues, as I say, make it an unusual period, and one that you need great leadership for. And I do worry at times, and I look at the United States as well as other countries. We don't have necessarily the statesmen that we've had in the past, and so that presents even further challenges in dealing with some of these issues.
Thank you. Frank, any thought?
A couple of additional thoughts to the wise intervention of my friend Ken Juster. Start out with the economic. Ken has pointed to the disruption of the war in Ukraine on global energy flows and grain supplies, and the uncertainties, particularly affecting Europe. I think even more than those immediate effects of the Ukraine crisis is that this period started at the tail end of the coronavirus pandemic. And during that period, we had a major slowdown in the global economy. And before we could be fully recovered from the slowdown in the global economy, along came the geopolitical crises that Ken has described. But we hadn't fully addressed the effects on the global economy. And particularly in that regard are the effects on financial markets and on the financial viability of nations, especially in what is now euphemistically referred to as the global South. Nations are struggling to meet their debt obligations, struggling to find capital, struggling to be able to pursue their development goals and alleviate the conditions of their citizenry. All of this has become substantially more difficult in the wake of the crises, the political crises that we faced, and they aren't likely to go away. India recognized them in the G20 meetings. The issue of sovereign debt in the was underscored, highlighted, and addressed to the degree that we're taking a fresh look, and some under Indian leadership, at key global institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, the role they play and how to bring more capital into the markets to be able to alleviate the pressures that we're currently experiencing. So, yeah, the economic effects are real. They're multi-shaped, and they're going to be with us for a while. They run the range from finances to grain supplies. The only thing that has been spared so far, somewhat to, I think, all of our, if not surprise, at least satisfaction, is that petroleum prices, despite the Gaza war, have stayed pretty stable. You have not seen a direct threat in the Gulf, and therefore a spiking in oil prices, which often political crises in the Middle East lead to. We haven't had that. That's good news for the moment. And there is always the risk the war could spread, and that's a real risk with the West Bank in flames now, with settler pressure on Palestinians and the fear that they would seek to cross the border into Jordan. The attacks of groups on northern Israel, not necessarily Hezbollah, but other Palestinian groups, the shelling of American troop positions in in Syria and in Iraq. All these could lead to an escalation. At the moment, I think we're very lucky that this terrible crisis in Gaza hasn't spread. It doesn't look like in the near term it's going to spread and become a region-wide conflict. Is there a role for India? I believe your question implied. There is, but India, I predict, will be very cautious about getting involved. Of course, India has interests, huge interests in the Middle East, in the stability of petroleum markets, the supply of hydrocarbons. India has huge working populations employed in the Middle East who are vulnerable at times like this. But India will be very careful in how she becomes involved. I do not foresee India taking a front row seat in the theater of negotiations over what comes next in Gaza. She'll follow it closely, but she'll let others who have more immediate responsibility and interest in the issues in hand take on the responsibility for dealing with the crisis. And India will be more the observer than the participant.
Thank you.
If I could just add a footnote to Frank's excellent comments, and something I alluded to earlier. In the wake of COVID-19 and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, people talk now of supply chains as an issue of national security. And there's been a rise of economic nationalism and, to a certain degree, protectionism. And trade has, unfortunately, in the United States, become a disfavored topic. And I think it is certainly reasonable to say, look, we can't have unrestrained trade, and you might have to make distinctions between some of your trusted partners and critical dependencies, and you have to try to protect people who get displaced by trade and have mechanisms for doing that. But I think it's a mistake if we just abandon trade completely. I think trade has produced enormous economic growth for countries throughout the world. I think it will continue to do so, and we've got to come up with a formulation of how to advance our trade relationships while addressing some of these new realities.
Thank you, Frank.
I want to chime in. Ken well said. I believe absolutely what you said. Trade is a major driver of global economic performance, and the current dalliance with national sovereignty is not healthy. I would argue as well that this is particularly important for India, because India has not looked with keen favor on multilateral trade arrangements. And I think India's missed a bet that part of sustained economic growth for India is going to mean growth in trade, and a healthy world trading system will be good for India's economy.
Thank you, Frank and Ken. So you have responded to more than that. What might be India's leadership role in the near future? Cautious and prudent approach. Why India takes this? To some people, it looks like not definitive posture on these various situations, because India wants to maintain its autonomy, sovereignty. India is not an ally of the United States. It's not Germany or Japan. It wants to maintain its posture. All that. I want to read one question, which is sometimes and often discussed in media and people. And both of you said India is doing well. There's a sense of confidence, buoyancy, optimism, economy is doing well, and all that. But there is sometimes some people think India's success have come at the cost of religious nationalism or lack of tolerance or pluralism, at least in the faith-based, and that is reduced the freedom of the press, some people think, and less tolerant of non-Hindu faith adherents in India. What do you think? What are the optics? Is that a little bit overstated? You know, we go through these kinds of belly aches. Or is it something more serious that we should all be concerned? Go ahead.
Who do you,
Frank, you go first, Frank.
Okay. Well, I alluded to the concerns that you raised in my opening remarks, and so I'm delighted to return to it. You know, for many years, I observed India and the Indian-American relationship, and one thing that I was struck by, when there were deficits in security relations, deficits in our economic ties, there was one principle that was always front and center and positive, and that was American regard for Indian democracy and the rule of law and India's respect of diversity and India's commitment to constitutional government, that no matter how poor India was a beacon to the entire world, that whatever people said, military coups in Africa, everything else, that democracy could actually work because it was working in India, a country that was struggling with development, struggling with population. That is a heritage India needs to preserve, maintain, nourish. That respect for India is based on principle as well as on the cold, hard realities of economics and security. And I am troubled today, frankly, by all of the reports that you cite. They're based on fact. There is a sense of minorities being disobliged. There is a sense of constraints on freedom of speech. There are concerns about the use of enforcement agencies with a political overtone to their actions. These are all issues that are not just domestic in India, but reflect on India's broader reputation on the global stage, and particularly in its ties to the United States. Now, having said that, I suspect I will find common ground with Ken. Having practiced diplomacy, there's a great deal of difference between the way governments deal with questions like this and the way that we as citizens do. governments need to be very careful and very measured in their discussions, one with the other, about internal domestic political matters. And to be very careful is not to carry out a public harangue and a public argument, but to make one's points in a polite, discreet, and careful manner, so that the other party knows what is the impact of his actions on interests that that party has. And that's where I hope to see our dialogue on these issues of values take place between India and the United States.
Those were excellent comments by Frank. If I could just add one or two thoughts. The question, as was posted, said that India's success has come at the cost of some of these domestic political and social issues. But I think it's somewhat different. I think India's success has come despite some of these issues. And if India was more unified domestically, I think it would have even greater success externally. Just like, by the way, if the United States was not as polarized, having these divisions and having these internal problems, I think weakens a country's efforts to be a forceful player in foreign affairs, because you lose what is Frank referred to as what's known as sort of your soft power, your model, your persuasiveness, and you're not all pushing together, rowing in unison for the same things. We even saw in Israel how some people feel that Israel was not as prepared for what happened with Hamas because they had all sorts of internal divisions. So it's not to say that a country will not have internal diversity and disagreements, but when you have major social breakups, that weakens you. So I think the success is not despite that, but the success did not come at the cost of these things. I think the success is despite that, and the success could be even more profound if they could have a better management, and all countries, the United States as well, of some of its internal divisions.
Thank you. Thank you. I agree with you. That's my thought too, that India has done remarkably well in spite of some issues and fragmentation. We're running out of time, but I'm going to ask you one question. I don't know the answer to this. It's an India question, and I don't know if you know the answer, but I'm going to put you in spot, and because this comes from a friend from Pennsylvania, one of our neighbors, and he asks, what is India's official position on Taiwan? I don't know, I confess. Maybe you know. Has it changed given the recent India-China unrest? So we're going to end on that, whatever you know, and confessionally, I don't know. What do you think, Ken?
I don't know the exact official enunciation of India's position. They have maintained a relationship with a Taiwanese representative in India, but they have not, I think, abandoned the policy that the government in Beijing is the representative government of China, but partly their reaction to some of the aggressive activities they've seen by China has been to maintain a strong and robust relationship with Taiwan, but not in a way to create a conflict with China, but simply to have, I think, a little leverage and to have that relationship more broadly. But I don't know the exact way they formulate their enunciation of that policy, but I think it's not that different from really what the United States is doing to a certain degree, although India obviously does not provide weapons and arms to Taiwan in the way the United States does, but they have had a relationship with the Taiwanese representative. It's not an ambassador, but there is a representative in Delhi.
Frank?
Let me add to Ken's description. Ken's absolutely right. India has a very clear position. There's one China, and Taiwan is part of that one China. And India's traditional respect of the one China view is based on more than just a long association with China and the core of China's interests in the world, but also India's. After all, India is made up of lots of different pieces that are stuck together in a federal union, and seeing people expressing territorial differences is not in India's DNA. She doesn't like that. But she does cooperate economically with Taiwan, and at the same time, India recognizes the vital importance of the sea lanes of the South China Sea, Malacca, and other major apertures through which world trade flows. India has a robust trading relationship with Japan, with Korea, and India does not want to see the freedom of navigation disrupted, the flow of global goods interrupted. India wants to see all of that open. India will not be an ally of the United States if the balloon ever really goes up between us and China. God hope it doesn't. India will not be involved militarily, but India will be a strong and stout proponent of freedom of navigation and respect for the order of the Eastern Pacific.
Thank you. And, we have many more questions, but we began with about 85 participants. We are down to 65, which tells me that people are keeping watch on the time. And we said we will do an hour. It's a little past that. I want to thank both of you, Ken and Frank, for making time in the midst of your busy schedules, and for your affection for India, for your love for India, and for all the care and concern that you espouse for India over decades. So we are deeply grateful, not only for India, for the global community, prosperity, mobility, and we are all better off. United States, of course, is in wonderful hands with policy designers like you. And that's one of the elements that makes this country most prosperous, most mobile, and most looked up to society. But your contribution to the global order is deeply appreciated. And thank you for taking time to be with MIT alumni and their friends this afternoon, this night. If you have a final word, a word of advice, caution to Jaishankar, Ajit Doval, Narendra Modi, or all the citizenry, we are happy to listen. The last word is yours. I'll let Ken go first, and Frank, it may be as simple as thank you, or maybe you have some insight. Ken, you, and then Frank, the last word.
Okay, well, thank you, GK. I think we actually have covered a great deal of territory. And I would just echo what Frank had said earlier, that the relationship between the United States and India is really has a tremendous amount of momentum behind it. Implementation will be key. There's a tremendous number of policy initiatives and the framework for cooperation, but the bureaucracies of both countries have to actually focus on a few key initiatives and actually getting them done, because the capacity and the capability and sometimes the inertia can get in the way, and it's impossible to boil the ocean. You have to really focus collectively on a few things. That's what we did with the civil nuclear deal. That's what I think will make the GE co-production of jet engines in India successful, and we need to do that in a few other areas. But it's against the backdrop of a very strong relationship, and one where even when differences arise, the parties can discuss them candidly and work through them, because, as Frank said, the ballast in the relationship is so substantial at this point in time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Frank?
I would add 2 points. The first is I'll associate myself again with Ken in saying I welcome the arrival of India on the world stage with the confidence and capabilities that she's developing. The balance of power is the best way to preserve the peace. Key lesson from Henry Kissinger's life. And having India as one of the major actors in maintaining that global balance, shaping global institutions, is in is good news for the United States. It doesn't mean we're always going to agree, but having a responsible voice at the table is important as we struggle to find our way forward in the global order and redesigning the global order. The second point I make is really more directed at you all at MIT, and that is there is literally an explosion in Indian university graduates coming to the United States for further study or undergraduates, as there is of American educational interest in India. The weighting is clearly in favor of Indians coming to America and attending great schools like MIT. But I hope that MIT will be looking for partnerships and ways that it can put its boots on the ground in India on its own or in cooperation with Indian educational institutions. For these tie-ups are going to be a key feature in the build-out of the U.S.-India relationship.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank and Ken, and thank you for your time, patience, and kindness. And thank you for taking time as Princeton and Harvard graduate. You've been so kind to MIT, friends and the MIT community. You're welcome anytime. You're part of us. Thank you. Have a delightful night, Ken. Have a delightful afternoon, Frank. And good evening, good night, good afternoon, whatever is appropriate to all the people. Thank you.
Thank you, GK.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reshma.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.